Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Live Ultralight Podcast powered by Ultra Vitals. Today, we are going to be doing a race recap on the Bryce Canyon 100. However, we're bringing on a new host for the day. So usually, I'm obviously the one hosting. But in this situation, I'm going to be the guest, and we're going to let our friend Jeff Pelletier kind of interview me and walk through the race in that way. So for those of you that don't know Jeff, me and you probably met about 3 years ago through the podcast. And Jeff runs a large YouTube channel, travels all over the world running these ultras.
Nice.
And we've stayed in touch over the years. And then last fall is when I got to meet you in person through pacing you through the Moab 240. But for those who don't know, go check out Jeff's YouTube channel. He's a fantastic interviewer, does some amazing films. But really, I'm just going to turn the reins straight over to you, Jeff, to be the host, I guess, for today.
Yeah, well, I have questions for you. And so I figured instead of you and I doing a, hour, 90-minute, call and hearing about your race, I figured, why don't we record it and let people in on these questions? So what I thought we would do is we'd talk a bit about your background, how you came to running, because running is a relatively new thing for you. Talk a little bit about the race itself and this race series, because I don't know much about the vacation race series. And then, of course, we'll get into the race as well and do a little bit of a play-by-play. So first of all, though, congratulations, man. First 100-miler. You did exceptionally well. So congrats. How are you feeling overall, physically, mentally, just, how are things?
Yeah. I feel really good. Like I had some, like my foot hurt for like a day, but the swelling went down and it was totally fine. So like, I really had no long-term issues. Now there's like some weirdness, I think, when you do an effort this big where like, you're like, I don't know what's wrong, but my calves feel a little just different than they ever have before. But all things considered, I'm feeling really good about the effort and feeling good physically.
Good. So you're relatively new to running. You've been running now for, I guess about 2.5 years. I know you picked it up shortly after I think we first spoke on the podcast. Tell me, just summarize for us all why you started running, how you started running, what that journey has been like, and why and how you decided to run 100 miles.
Yeah. So I never anticipated running ultras. I only started to run to condense training for backpacking and for fast packing. I was getting more and more interested in this idea of like, hey, if I go from being able to hike 15 miles a day to being able to do like a fast packing trip where maybe you cover 30 miles a day, suddenly like a whole world of trail opportunities open up to me for my life, my timelines, you know what I mean? And so that was like the spurs, like, hey, I've wanted to go do certain hikes for a long time. I've never done them because it would take me too long. And so I got really interested in fast packing, and I just saw running as the tool to train for that. So the whole first year that I did any running at all, and I'm talking like I'm going from like, I'd run like maybe a mile on a treadmill at the gym before I like lifted weights. That was the most I'd ever run, or like in gym class growing up when they'd make you run a mile.
Yeah.
But those I felt good if I ever could complete those without getting a side ache or like having to stop and walk. Like that was my condition of running, right?
I remember reading there's a quote that's like, my sport is your sport's punishment. Right, that's like when you're playing soccer, they're like, go run 4 laps around the track. Like,
oh man, wind sprints in football, like that, there wasn't a worse torture. You know what I mean? So yeah, that was my history. So, but as I started to train for fast packing and things like that, I started to just follow guys like you. But then also, it just opened up this world of like distance and ultra distances and then ultra marathons. And so I started to get on my radar. And I think after, the first like 6 or so months of training, I was like, I wonder if I could do an ultra.
Sure.
And funny enough, like our first real fast packing trip, we went over this mountain range called the Tusher Mountain Range. It was like a 70-mile trip. And we bumped into some guys that were up there, and they're like, oh yeah, on Saturday, we're running an ultra marathon up here. And I was like, oh, I never knew there was an ultra marathon in our own backyard on this mountain range. And we left that trip, and that just kind of stuck with me. So eventually I looked it up and was like, maybe I could run this ultra right here in our own backyard. And so, it was probably about 10 months into me starting to like run once or twice a week when I was like, hey, I'm going to sign up for this first ultra. And then I can like, and part of me, to be honest, at that point was like, then I can talk to guys that run ultras and be like, yeah, at least I've done it and I can relate and I can ask better questions and understand it. Right. Yeah. And so that was a part of the first thing. But then there's also the side of me that was like, I don't know why, but like a marathon doesn't seem like a hard enough effort or like a cool enough thing. And so I'm like my marathon, like everyone's like, I want to run a marathon once in my life. To me, it was like, if I ran an ultra, that would be cooler and be like more of a challenge. And so, yeah, that was really it. Signed up for that first ultra and it punished the crap out of me. And then I don't know why I stuck with it.
And so an ultra being like, technically it's anything longer than a marathon. A marathon is 42 kilometers, 26 miles roughly. And technically an ultra is like anything longer than that. In practice, it's around 30 miles, 50 kilometers is usually, and then 50 miles or 80 kilometers, and it goes up from there. So how long was that first ultra that you took on?
So it's called a 70K, but it's like 75 plus K in reality. So I want to say the first year it was around 45, 46 miles.
Sure. And that's like 46 miles of trails with elevation change. So it's a lot of time on feet. This isn't marathon pace. It's up, down, there's aid stations, you're taking breaks, but you're moving for hours at a time. So I remember talking about that. You learned a lot from that. I know you're struggling still with some hydration and nutrition issues, but it sounds like you got the bug. What started out as a bucket list item for you, you thought, no, maybe there's more here for me. What's next, right? So
I finished that and I think it's on camera and I was like, don't ever let me do that again. I don't need to ever do that again. And I mean, and that's through like my slurred speech because I was so messed up and my face was twitching. And I mean, it was bad, right? And 2 days later, I was like, I have to go back and do that again. Like I had like a revenge bug, honestly, where it was like, I have to like do that how I trained to do it. And then I kind of had the bug. Yeah.
Yeah. So how long after that was it when you chose, again, there's these benchmarks in ultra running. There's 50K, 50 miles or 80K, 100K is another one. And then 100 miles, which is the big one. That's the one where you're running through the night, you're seeing the sunrise. To me, that there's something special about seeing the sunrise while you're out there running. So to me, I don't think everybody has to run a 100-miler, but there's something special about doing that. When did you decide you wanted to do a 100-miler?
Honestly, it was not even on my radar for the first 2.5 years of running. So I ran that first one, and the idea of going any farther was like impossible. So then I ran it again, and I was like, the idea of going any farther was like pretty much no still. Like there's no way. So it wasn't until last October, which was, I don't know how many months ago now, 6 or 7 months ago or something, when I came out to pace you, and I was running kind of 30-mile segments with you. So I ran the first one, took like a 4-hour nap, came back in. I mean, it was probably longer than that, but that's how long I slept. And then ran another 30 miles. And it was cooler conditions because I was usually running with you in the nighttime. It's a slower pace because it's a 240-mile race, not a 50.
This was the Moab 240, of course. A lot of people will have heard you talk about that. So I was doing a 240-miler. Tayson was coming up to join me for sort of starting around that, just after the halfway point for some of the more mountainous sections as my pacer.
Yeah, and so through that effort, it turned on this light bulb of like, hey, if I like slow down and I don't run at crazy high altitudes and I don't find a race that's so hot and exposed, maybe I could go farther. Like maybe this impossible thing of doing, say, 100-miler like might be possible. And so that got the wheels turning. But prior to that, it was like, no, that's completely impossible for me. I'm not a runner, right? Because that's always been my excuse was, I'm a 200-pound runner, and I'm not built for this, and I haven't done it my whole life. And so it always felt like I was, I don't know, I run, but I'm not a quote unquote runner. And so, yeah, it wasn't until I did that effort that I'm like, maybe in the right situation, or if I if I didn't go run at the top of 12,000 foot mountain, maybe I could do it. And so that got the wheels turning. And then, yeah, I kind of shopped around looking at hundreds for a minute, and it was pretty tough to get in them, I realized pretty quickly. There's qualifications for them, and the ones that I've heard of, they're sold out, waitlist, lottery systems.
Lotteries, yeah.
And so I kind of looked at that at the end of last year, and then I found a couple that were that just doesn't look like fun. It was real deserty. I don't know. And so then this one popped up, the Bryce Canyon 100 onto my radar, and I think the reason it hadn't popped up before is they don't run their system off of Ultra Sign Up. It seems like they kind of have a competing product per se.
Yeah. So this is, if I can jump in, this is Vacation Races. That's the race series. I don't know a lot about their races. They look to be maybe smaller, but very scenic. Antelope Canyon, Bryce Canyon, Zion. So they're living up to the name. It's like these are vacation destination places to run. And so what you're mentioning is ultrasignup.com is sort of it's the main website, at least in North America, for ultras, where you both find and register and even look for results. So you can find athletes. All their results are on there. It's like one system. And yeah, like you said, they're not on there. And so, but obviously this was close to where you live. You're in southern Utah, so you're probably looking for something not too far from home. This is almost in your backyard, right? Bryce Canyon. So it does look beautiful. So what is it about this course that appealed to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, one, I just wanted to run something that was pretty, like not just like there was one that I was looking at like outside of Vegas and it's like literally running in this dirt hole, it seemed like. And so, yeah, when this one came on, it's like, oh, it's going to be pretty. I know that it's local. And the reason I hadn't come up, they only run it every other year for the 100-mile distance. And so, so that's why like when it finally popped up onto my radar, I was like, oh, wow. Like, yes, I'm really interested in this. Like it has mountains, it has scenery. It's not like just crazy monotonous and stuff. And so, yeah, I looked into it. I literally looked into it. It had a qualification of running a 50-mile ultra before that. Well, I've never run one. I've only run like these 45 to 47-mile ultras. And so I actually had to email in and say, hey, I think you should consider letting me into this race. This is my ultra running career, but also like, I'd like backpack a ton and, different things. And they're like, yeah, we'll let you in. And then, so I like, oh, but in that conversation too, they're like, but you should do Antelope Canyon instead of like this one. And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, oh yeah, Bryce Canyon's like our harder one. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not interested in running in just the sand. And anyways, they let me in. And so then I was like, okay, I think part of that like played into the conversation, into my decision of like, well, now I have to. But I literally thought about it for like 2 days. I hadn't been running prior. I'd been running about maybe 5 miles a week prior to signing up. I had 3 months before the race. And I thought about it for a little bit, and I just asked myself the question of, why not? Instead of look at all the reasons why I shouldn't. Like, I just was like, why not? And then why not now? And really, I couldn't come up with a great reason not to, because I think in a lot of like when you go start looking at 100-mile training plans and stuff, I think most people plan them a little farther out than 3 months and do training a little farther than that. But I was like, you know what? Like I think I'm at this stage right now in my life where I can just dedicate all of my free time to it. And so I was like, why not just do it right now? And so, went for it.
And like you said, you're coming into it with maybe, not necessarily like a lot of running experience, but a lot of backpacking experience. And 100 milers, I mean, there's a lot of hiking in it too. They're typically designed where the cutoff times, like you might have the top 10 runners really competing and racing, and then everybody else is out there kind of just trying to get it done. And usually the cutoff times reflect that. So I think, and we'll get into the race itself, but I'm sure your experience, just time on feet, just being out in nature, that grit that you developed too, I'm sure it played a role in your success here as well. So tell us about the race. This is 100 miles, but it's my understanding is it's actually basically 2 big 50-mile loops, right? It's 2 loops of the 50-mile course.
That's what they changed it to the week of. It wasn't supposed to be that. So it was supposed to be the big loop and then a big out and back. And the out and back went to the highest points in the races up to like 9,500 feet. And I went and ran a little section of it. And there was some really like steep, nastier sections in it that were a little more single track and less traveled. But the week of, they emailed out like on the Tuesday before the Saturday, and they're like, hey, there's too much snow in the high country. We can't get to the aid stations. So they changed that to 2 50-mile loops. And of course, like your 50-mile loop too, like the 50-mile mark is like the closest to the start and finish, which that'll come up. But, and then they also it has 7,000 to 9,000 feet. They said. I'm not sure what you ended up with. Was that about right? So with the loop, the way that we did it, it ended up having about 15,000 feet of climbing.
15,000 feet of climbing. Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then there was the last thing that they pulled on us the night before was there's another aid station that they end up closing down. So there was a 30-mile segment of no crew.
Okay. Do you know roughly how many racers started? How deep the
Yeah,
field was?
there's about 115.
Okay, 115. Okay. Yeah. So on the smaller end, but that's actually pretty common for North American ultras. They tend to be smaller compared to, say, a comparable race in Europe. So let's get into it then. We've got this race. You got a few curveballs thrown at you. It's now 2 loops instead of 1. So mentally, that's more challenging, which we'll talk about. More elevation change than you'd banked on. Tell us about the sort of the start time, set the stage for us for that first day and what your goals and expectations were heading into the race.
Yeah, so goals and expectations, obviously goal number 1 is to finish. Now, I'd looked at this course previously in previous years, and there was almost a 50% failure rate of people, right? And so to me, I was like, that says 2 things. It either says like vacation races is attracting vacationers,
Sure,
or like the course is harder than people expect. And then when I'd talked to some people, like the people that put on the race, they'd kind of said the same thing, like, "Oh, Bryce is the hard one." It's like, and then when I'd like look at the layout, I'm like, I don't see how this is as hard as like the Tusher one that I'd done. But knowing that, it was like, all right, goal number 1 is finish. Like everyone else has done a 50-mile ultra. I never have. Half of them aren't finishing. So I need to finish. Goal number 2 was like, if I ran exceptionally well, I thought that maybe like a 30-hour mark would be possible. But I also like looking at the metrics that depending on the year, that was like top 10% of runners, which I'm like, that's probably way too high. But again, it's not a race as much as other races that are, UTMB qualifiers or like, you know what I'm saying? But
yeah, where you're getting the best in the world.
So I'm like, perfect scenario, I could do this in 30 hours, but the goal is to finish for sure. And
sorry,
so
what was the cutoff time for the race?
36 hours.
36. Okay. So that wouldn't give you a huge buffer, but like you said, it would put you in the top 10%. So 36 hours, the race started on the Saturday morning at 5 a.m.?
Yep.
Which is pretty typical. So you're waking up at whatever, 2:33 a.m. to get ready. Yeah. So, and then
camped at the start line in my, just camped in the start. So I was able to sleep in a little bit longer.
That's great. You're relaxed. You don't have to worry about traffic and trying to drive somewhere in the morning. But that would put you at like, you'd be starting at 5 in the morning and you're finishing kind of the next evening. So you're running all day, all through the night, and then into the next
afternoon
day as well.
At least. Yeah. The cutoff would have been, I want to say around, 5, I think it was 5 p.m.
5 p.m.
following
right? Sorry.
day.
So you're aiming to finish, around lunchtime, call it. But the next day, so you're running a whole day, whole night, and then the next morning. So tell us about how you felt that morning.
Yeah, so I was doing everything I could because I have all these theories. Like I've done this other ultra where I've failed, in my mind, kind of like failed at certain aspects of it. And so I was trying to bring in all those things. And one of the things that I theorized about was that I get excited for the race and it elevates my heart rate. And then it caused me to have like early cramping issues. But obviously there's other aspects like the high altitude in the other race and some other things. And so I didn't take any caffeine. I tried to just stay super level headed. And then I kind of had these like governor marks, meaning like, I don't want to run faster than this. So I was too scared about getting too relaxed and wanting to go too fast because there's all these racers around me. And so I really focused on that in the beginning. So the whole morning it was like smooth, like get to the race line smooth. Don't get excited about anything. Like try to just play this and keep that mindset. And so, that was kind of where we were at. We ended up starting. And then as you start running, I didn't think I was towards the front, but like, I just remember watching cause you're on a big open dirt road to start. I just remember letting all these people kind of pass me. And I'm like, okay, like be cool with it. Just relax. Like it doesn't matter, cause really in the reality, like position doesn't matter and didn't matter for me. But there's a psychological side of passing or getting passed. No matter if you're 60th place and it goes to 61, which is like, it doesn't matter, but psychologically in the moment, it's easy for me to care about that. And so, I just remember like trying to run really slow first miles and just not get too excited because I was so nervous about elevating that heart rate too early in the race.
Good. Yeah. Running your own race is so hard. And that's, something you learn, I think, with experience is that idea of like, you want to be passing people, but it's much better to get passed early and then be passing people later in a race like that. And maybe that'll end up being what your experience was. So just kind of summarize, how did the first, say, 50 kilometers go for you? Because that's kind of the warm up in a 100-mile race. And was that kind of your thinking? Was it sort of just like get, say, 50K, 50 miles in? Like what was your strategy?
Well, yeah. So the very first crew aid station was about 18 miles in. And so that's like a bit of like the landmark I was looking at to get there and to feel good. Like if I could get there and feel good, because also keep in mind, both of those other ultras that I ran, I started cramping by like mile 10, which was totally unprecedented, right? Like it's still like just a weird thing, but yeah. So I was like, just if I can get there and I'm not cramping, then hopefully I'm in a rhythm and the rest can fall into place. And so, yeah, so the first miles, like, they went smooth. Like I found someone that I talked with for a little while and was able to breathe through my nose. And then we kind of got funneled into this really steep climb. And at that point, there's some other race distances that started to funnel onto the same trail. So then it got clogged up for a while. And I mean, there was just some different dynamics but again, it was like one of those scenarios where in the first ultras, there's like a really steep section. And in the first ultra, I would have been like, oh, I got to pass these people. Like, why not? And in this one, I'm like, nope, like just hang out here. Like just walk it, it doesn't matter. And then we got up to the top and there was just a really long, smooth road. And so I ran a big, like 9-mile segment there. And so really, it felt quite smooth. Got to mile 18 and, I actually took this from you, but I had like put together a pace chart essentially that I gave to my group that has like all of my, like the aid stations here and then like my projected times, they get like wider. I mean, I saw that on your video and I was like, that's money. And so when I rolled into the Blue Fly, that would have been East Fork aid station, and saw my crew for the first time, they're like, hey, you're ahead of schedule. And in my mind, I was like, that's perfect because I was trying to really hold back. So like, I felt like I hit that spot in a great position. And that gave me a lot of confidence. Like, hey, I at least ran this first part right. And hopefully now I'm like into a groove.
So tell us about your crew. What was your support system for this race?
Yeah, so my parents were there. They just have a truck and a camper shell, which I thought would be really useful after watching you use the Ross Monster on the Moab 240. And it ended up not being as big of a deal because I didn't like sleep, right? But no, so I just had my parents there. I'd like laid everything out, had all of my drop bags for each aid station. And really the only thing that I had to like prep them on was having them pre-mix like my high carb drink mixes into a water bladder. And then that way I could just swap out a water bladder and grab anything else that I needed. And so that was the crew. And then I had one of our guys from Outdoor Vitals there filming. He was there on a media pass filming. And then I did have a pacer that was going to come in at mile 65 that following night. So.
Okay. And so let's talk now actually as well about your nutrition and your hydration. At this stage, you're probably still on your plan, and things may have changed later, but what was at least your plan for nutrition and hydration going in?
Yeah, so my plan was to be drinking. Because I'm like a little bit of a bigger guy, I was aiming to eat or drink over 500 calories an hour. And then for salt intake, it was to be drinking in all my fluids at least 1,000 milligrams of sodium in every liter. And then obviously like any eating is a little bit above that. And then for amount of hydration, I was kind of, my range, I guess, is typically like middle of the night might be like 1 liter an hour, but then peak of the day gets closer to 2 liters an hour. So I wanted to be more flexible.
You're a heavy sweater, and you've determined that, I think, through both testing as well as just anecdotal experience, right?
Yeah, and I actually switched out some gear and some things this year to run in some gear that was a little bit more helpful for heat. And so just realizing like how much better I perform in the cold. And so I ran in a slightly different kit where I'd been running in like a sun hoodie before. Yeah. And I just realized how much additional heat the sun hoodie was bringing on. And so like I used to say like, oh, I sweat 2 liters an hour. That is like the maximum worst conditions. And so I have been able to pull that back just a little bit with changing up some gear and some things like that. But yeah, overall, I was kind of planning on ranging, closer to about 1.5 liters or less an hour. Yeah, that's kind of like the 3 markers. Now, I will say though, just like the week prior to the race, which is always the worst thing, right? But I jumped on a call with a friend who is around runners a lot and has a lot more experience than me, and I kind of laid out my strategy, and he's like, "Oh man, like if you're mixing in that much carbs, like you may have a hard time like eating on top of that, because I was intaking like, almost like 100 carbs an hour in the drink mix essentially. Yeah. So then he's like, you might struggle to eat, but like, that's fine. So then I kind of had that in the back of my mind where it's like, I kind of deprioritized eating just a little bit because I knew how much I was drinking in carbs. Mm-hmm. So primary source absolutely was carbohydrates in the drink mix with Scratch products.
Scratch. A little bit. That was the Scratch Super Fuel, I'd imagine.
Yeah. So I used the Super Fuel. They call it high carb drink mix now.
Right.
They rebranded that. And then I mix in their other product, the Sport drink mix, to just get the right concentration of salt.
Yep.
And then I did have, I'd learned from other experience to have one flask and then just some salt tabs so that I can kind of use the one clear water to help regulate if I'm feeling one way or another.
Perfect. Yeah, that's really smart. So made it through the first aid station, 18 miles, you said, for the first supported aid station. Were there other aid stations every 10 miles?
Yeah. So we kind of ran through one at like 2 miles, but that was more for the next round. So the real other aid station that I actually did anything at was at about mile 9. So about mile 9, I stopped, grabbed my drop bag and swapped a couple little things, and then ran basically another mile or 9 miles into the next one. So
well, 9 miles, about 15 kilometers. That feels like a good cadence to me for an aid station. It's not too, not too far apart and not too frequent.
It threw me off because I had all of my drop bags planned for the previous or the different distance, and they were slightly bigger distances. So then when they shortened them, it honestly made it harder for me because I had like my water bladder, a 2-liter water bladder that I was using a lot. And so then I'm like, wait, that's going to be too much fluid for this distance now. And so it was.
So it kind of threw the math off you. Then all this crap.
Yeah, it did. But
so take us through the next 18 miles or so.
Yeah. So the next 18 miles had like a 6-mile push to another aid station area. Things went really smooth there. Ended up talking to a guy named Andy for a while, and he'd run Leadville. And so it's just kind of learning, I guess, a little bit about that from people that had run other 100-mile races, and ran into the next aid station. There's lots of dust. Mind you, like we were running on some of these roads, and there's just this powdery dust. There's lines, like almost a mile of like vehicles, it seemed like, because they had like 3 or 4 different distances coming into the one aid station. And so that made it a little bit challenging, but everything went smooth. I mean, the only thing that didn't go smooth there is I filled up my water bladder, and I don't know if it was me or my parents, but like somehow the top didn't seal and it just exploded all over my lap. And so I'm covered in like sticky goo basically. But that was like the only thing that didn't go smooth. And then I got the stuff I needed there, went to the next section, which is an 8-mile section. And that's where things started to get hard again. Now I knew that like in the middle of the day from my own experience that I needed to dial back effort a little bit in the middle of the day because I am a heavy sweater and because I don't do great in the heat. And so it's like, hey, if I'm going to dial back anything, like dial back in the middle of the day, turn it on at night, right? Like go harder at night. And so that was in my mind, but it still wasn't like, I thought it was still kind of earlier morning, it was probably about noon by that point. And so going through that next section, it was these roller, like you kind of like roll into a canyon and then kind of roll out and roll in, and it's down and then back up and down and back up. But overall, you're like net gaining over and over and over. And so by the time I finally got through that, like all those rollers, I was like, holy cow, that was a lot of climbing, but kind of like sneaky climbing. And it definitely was like slower, a little bit slower of a section than I thought. But from there, kind of drop down pretty steeply and then run into the next aid station. And at that point, that would have been an area called Red Canyon, and that was about 33 miles in. But that's when it's like getting into the heat of the day. And at Red Canyon, you go and do a loop right there, which was like I'd heard along the way from people that were running it. They're like, oh yeah, that section really sucks. And so I was kind of like building that up in my mind. But got into Red Canyon, and Joe, that was there filming, decided, he's like, oh, I can run this like 6-mile section with you and get some film. So he jumped in, and I was still feeling really good at that point. So I was climbing really good, feeling really good. And so I did push a little bit through that section that I can remember. And I was passing people on these climbs, and I remember Joe being like, man, you're like climbing really well. I was like, yeah, I feel really good. And I've always been, usually I'm a better climber. But I remember looking down at my arms and just seeing like my entire arm was just glazed with sweat. And I'm like, it's hot. Like it's definitely getting hot, and it's totally exposed. Because if you've seen Bryce Canyon, it's these open desert red rock canyons. There's no, especially in this area, there was no vegetation, and so it's very exposed. It's 1-2 in the afternoon, but made it through that section, still feeling really good, still running. I had been concerned too because in some of these other ultras, my shin or like my tib gets really tight and starts to hurt, and then it starts to hurt my knee. And so I'm kind of just, being thankful for as long as I'm able to run and as smooth as I'm able to run. And so even on like these steeper sections, was still moving really fluid and well. And so at this point, still things are going really well. But when I loop back into that Red Canyon aid station, that's where that like 30-mile segment comes in with no crew. And, like I say, it's only like 2 p.m. So it's like, hey, I'll see you at like midnight, like tonight or 11 p.m. And because of some of the changes in the course, thankfully, I realized right before I was about to leave that I needed to grab a headlamp even before I'd see them again. And so, that was kind of like where the race started more so to like become like not just a smooth sailing thing, but yeah.
Looking at the elevation profile on your Strava, it started out, you did 2 big climbs. You guys climbed up to 2,600 meters. So that's like 8,600 feet, I think. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of I can see all that. Like it looks like just a lot of rollers, but then you drop all the way down. But you never go lower than, what is it here, 2,100 meters?
It's around 7,000. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the lowest you got. And then you start just climbing again. And that's probably what you're talking about now. I can see your heart rate's fluctuating a little bit there. It looks like it might have spiked a bit when you had somebody filming you. You might have been a little bit of adrenaline maybe. But that's also where, like you say, it got warmer. But paint a picture for us of what the terrain looked like underfoot at this point. How technical was it? Were you able to get a bit of a flow, or was it single track? Was it, what was the terrain itself like?
Yeah. So pretty much from mile 25 on, it's all single track until let's see, about mile like 56 or something. So there's a huge section of just single track, and part of it was like a bike trail that's a little bit more established. There's some equestrian stuff going on in that area too, but it was single track. Now, as far as how technical, there would be a segment like the bike trail segment from Coyote Hollow to Red Hollow, really quite good trail, except for there's a few steep downhills. As far as just like technical underfoot, not too bad.
Was it sand, dirt, slick rock? Like what was the surface?
Yeah. So it was not much slick rock. It was mainly just dirt, but the dirt there turns to like powder. So not so much sand either, but it's this powdery dirt. And so wherever you got into areas where it's high traffic, it was very, very powdery. And then, so like somewhere probably around, it's probably Red Canyon too there. So maybe 38 miles in, I did a sock swap, and I was like blown away at how dirty my feet were already. Yep. So I was using like Injinji socks, and so I'm pulling off each toe, and I'm like, wow. So I wiped them down with a wet wipe. But yeah, I mean, definitely just the sandy stuff that was pretty good at getting into shoes that, like, my shoes don't normally make my feet too dirty. Like, they're not quite that open of a weave. Some are like knit that just dump dirt inside of them, and mine aren't too bad. I was running in the Hoka Speed Goats, but yeah. So, and then as far as just trail conditions, it wasn't nearly as technical as other trails. Like nothing like the Tusher one, where it's like, this is a goat trail, this isn't a real trail. You know what I mean? but also not all of it is just like graded nice switchbacks. Like there was some parts in that Red Hollow section where you're doing big, 1.5 2 foot step ups, and and so there's definitely some of that mixed in there too.
How was the body feeling at this point?
So yeah, at this point I was feeling good. Like I said, I ran that loop in Red Canyon really well. Things were feeling really good. I'm trying to think. I think I had a little bit of food right there before I left that on to go on the big section on my own. But overall, things are working, right? So I'm happy. I'm happy at this point. As soon as I left that aid station, though, there's a pretty long, slow climb out of there, and I started to feel different right then. And at first it wasn't like a big deal. It was like, oh, maybe I'm just like digesting the couple of quesadillas, pieces I had, or maybe this, and then kind of keep pushing through that area. And I caught up to a couple people, and they were looking like horrible. The one girl was like throwing up, and I'm like, oh man, like that's interesting. Like, cause I'm feeling pretty crappy too, And so then kind of limp through that section for 6 miles and get to this section called Hillsdale Canyon. Joe was there because he had this media pass, so he was allowed there. And I got into that station thinking like, hey Joe, I know I've been ahead of all of my paces so far, but I feel like garbage. And I think when I get to you guys tonight, I'm probably gonna need to like lay down and sleep for like 20 minutes or something. Like obviously that's like 20 miles away. So I'm just like totally projecting out everything, but it was like it was not going great right there, and I was still trying to piece together what was going on. Like my stomach wasn't really wanting more food and liquids, and I'm just feeling, I'm not like on a calorie wall, but I'm just feeling lethargic and just not in a good spot, right? So get some nutrition kind of there, restock everything, and then head out on the next section. And the next section I knew was going to be hard because I knew it had some big climbs in it. And so I'm moving through that section, and I start to like spiral a bit because I'm like, this is only mile, 45 or something like that. Like, why am I feeling this way? I'd just done the Grand Canyon rim to rim to rim, which was a 50-mile effort. And I've ended that day feeling way better than I am right now. And I'm, and this is my ultra. I still have 50 plus more miles. And so I'm kind of going through all those thoughts and not feeling good. And then I get to these climbs, and I climb this climb, and I'm like, oh, and I'm looking at like the little chart on your watch, right, of your elevation. And I see the top of the climb, and I see it come down. I'm like, okay, we get to the top of this climb, and I drop down to the aid station. I get to the top of the climb, I start dropping down. I'm like, this doesn't look like the canyon the aid station's in. And I realized, oh, that was just a first little climb. There's the big climb behind it. And that was where I really was like, holy crap. When I get to this next aid station, should I just turn down and do a 50, and call it a 50-mile ultra, go back to the start? I'm starting to go dark, and I'm like, I'm just painting this picture of like, this is so bad. I don't know what's going on. I'm mentally going down. I'm like, I'm only 47 or something 48 miles in. Mm-hmm. Like I expected a low. I expected my low at mile 80 or mile 90, right? I did not expect it right now. And so I'm like, if I feel this bad right now, how's this going to work? So finally I'm going along.
Sorry, remind us how far into the race is it time-wise at this point? What time of day and how many hours have you been on feet?
Yeah, so it's coming up on like 6, 7 p.m., right? So it's 13, 14 hours in. And so finally I'm like, hey, I'm not getting any fluids down. I'm not getting any food down right now. The next time I see like a log to sit on, I'm just going to sit on the log and try see if stopping allows me to get food down, and just reset for a second. And so I do. I sit down, take like a 3-4 minute break, and I get some food down and some water down. I'm like, okay, that worked. Like, and I'm like, let's just get to the next aid station, and I'll take a little bit longer break and see what that does for me. Because I had been the words, I think you had said them during the Moab Ultra, like this relentless forward progress. And so that was like the mantra of the race, was just like, I was going through aid stations really smooth, really fast. I wasn't wasting time. So this is the first one where I'm like, I may need to like take a minute here. Mm-hmm. And so I finally get to the top of this climb, and I get down into this aid station that's below it on the other side. I sit down, and I could have fallen asleep in 5 seconds, like 5 seconds. And I'm sitting there, and I'm listening to all these ultra runners behind me in the tent, because this kind of tent section was all full, and I was kind of sitting on the outside. And I'm listening to all these guys, and they're all ultra runners that have run other hundreds, and they're all just commiserating, right? They're like, this is so hard. Like they're going off like, oh, I've been throwing up, and I've been this, and I don't know what's going on, and the more I listened to them, the more it actually helped me process what was actually happening for me, which was, in retrospect, was just like heat stroke and heat fatigue. And it had come on kind of so slow and steady that I didn't pinpoint it as what it was. And so I got thinking a little bit more, and I'm like, if I can just get some calories down, get fluids down, and it's cooling off now because now it's 7 p.m. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I think I can rebound this. If I just take it, like just cool it off, like don't run right now, just walk and eat. So I did. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes. And then I was like, okay, I need to get my stuff together. So I got my stuff together, and I'm like, because I'm also worried about cramping. Cramping is like the number one thing that's plagued me. So I'm like, I don't want to sit here too long. And one thing that I've learned with some experience is that I think rapid cooling has triggered a lot of cramping for me. It's stuff that like alpine, guys that are doing alpinists, like they'll see that a lot. They'll be sweating, climbing, and then when they stop, they'll cool off and it'll cause cramping. And so it was starting to cool off, which was really good to get my core temperature down. But I'm like, I can't do this too long because for some reason, when I finish running, like even if I go out for like a 2-hour run or something, I have this weird like heat fluctuation thing that happens after where I get super cold. And I think it's because my body continues to sweat, but I continue, stop exerting.
Yeah. Your body doesn't know that you're done yet. So it's still in that high state of like, I better keep cooling you. That's why we often have this like, after you're running, sometimes you get like, you start to shiver really quickly. Like your body's still trying to cool itself. And it's like, it doesn't know that it can just relax. Right. So anyway, yeah.
So keeping that in mind, I ended up, trying to like, okay, I need to just walk, you know what I mean? And so I got back on my feet. I was eating and drinking, thankfully, again, at that point. I got some good amount of food down me. And right as I stood up to leave, though, my buddy Andy that I'd hiked a little bit with came in, and he wasn't looking good. And I was like, hey, how you feeling? And again, this like has no bearing because it's like the middle of an ultra. There's some bias in there, right? But he looks at me and is like, I'm not doing good. This is way harder than Leadville. And I was like, really? And the lady next to him was like, oh yeah, I've done Leadville. This is way harder than Leadville. And I was like, interesting. Well, like, go on. But to me, I was just like, you hear so much talk about Leadville, right? And so to me, I was like, if this is harder than Leadville, maybe I'm not doing that bad after all. Like maybe I'm being too hard on myself, right? And so I just kind of took that as like one little win, listening to all these other ultra runners that had done hundreds and how they were feeling. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm a little bit better than them. I'm not throwing up. I'm not, and so I kind of took all that and I took a little bit of motivation out of that, left and was just like, okay, hit my markers. Like I have to get rehydrated. I haven't, gone to the bathroom in 15 miles or something like that. Like that's goal number one, like drink enough to get back to there. And so I did, I just started walking up this climb, and this climb was probably a 3-mile climb. And literally by the time I got to the top of that climb, I had like rebounded so much. It was cooling off. It was almost dusk. It wasn't quite like, it was almost time to pull out the headlamp. And so between the temperatures cooling off, me slowing down exertion enough to get fluids in, completely rebounded. And then it was like, hey, I'm feeling good again. It's nighttime. I'm like I made it through, and I think I'm going to do well during the nighttime. Like I'm going to be able to push again. And so, yeah, got through that next section and like got to a point where I was like kind of passing up people again, feeling pretty well. Got up to this uncrewed aid station called Blue Fly. So that would have been mile 56. And by that point, it's full dark. And again, it's just like, it's all these little things that I'd learned were just adding up. So like I grab my gear, trying to be efficient in these aid stations, but I go and I sit in this tent, and it was just like, I could have easily just sat in that chair for a while, just like the rest of these people that were all around me that were at the last aid station that were struggling. And I'm just like, no, like I know I'll cramp up because it's so cold up here. This is like kind of the high, most exposed part of the race. And so like, I think all of those little things were just paying dividends. So I was quick in those aid stations, got out, and was able to, not cool off to the point where I was really struggling. And then it was like this most runnable section of the race right there. And I had rebuilt myself to a point where I could run it again. So I was running this section. I was passing some people, and I was just like, this is good again. Like I was like, it was like this full rebound. So I was running with my headlamp through there. I'm about 4 miles from the Carubal aid station, and headlight goes to reserve mode.
Oh no.
And no backups. So it slowed me to a walk for a while. Yeah. And I was trying to catch up to a guy in front of me to maybe use his headlamp. And I was just about to him, and these 2 ladies come running by that I had talked to at an aid station behind us. One of them was like a race director for a really cool race out in Virginia. And anyway, so I start running with them, and they are flying. Like, and they're like, oh yeah, we're out hunting. It's nighttime. We're good. Like we're like, and it was like, they were clearly, she's like, this is like my 20th 100-miler, and like they knew what they were doing. And so I'm like trying to push. I'm like, I don't know if I can run this fast. You guys are like hauling butt now. Like this is the lady that was thrown up earlier. And anyway, so I push and like run with them in, and it was a really good last, 2 miles or 3 miles. But it was interesting because I did not think I could run that fast, but I totally ran it just fine with them. And so like looking back now, like that probably was an interesting thing. But again, my whole mentality going into this like constantly was don't over push, don't overstretch. Like I was so nervous about that. And so
it's hard to run your own race when you are literally trying to keep up with somebody to use their headlamp.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So all in all, like I got into that next aid station, and that's where I picked up my crew member. So this guy named Brandon Gilman, he's a guy that I actually met through work here. He's done like our 100-mile challenge program, and just a really cool guy, really cool dad. And so we had brought him on to a podcast or something like that a year or two previous, and he'd reached out and said like, hey, do you need a pacer? Like I think that'd be really cool. So he ended up coming down, and he's also associated with this company called Kogalla. And they make these waist lights like we'd seen on the Moab 240. Yeah. So I pick up my waist light, which I had already had and was training with, and ran a waist light headlamp as well. And it was like full brightness out now. I had a pacer. I did a gear swap there. So I changed my clothes just to fresh stuff. Yep.
Before we get into that next part, just catch us up. What mileage are we at now when you pick up the pacer? And what time?
Yeah. Mile 65, and it's now a little after midnight.
Okay, so we're over 100 kilometers. I can see there was a big descent, and now you're into sort of a flatter section, relatively speaking. How much of a motivator? How much were you looking forward to that having a pacer? And what did that do for you mentally?
Well, just like with the Moab 240, I'd never met Brandon, so this was going to be my first in-person meeting of him, and so. I think coming into it, it was like, oh, this will be nice, but I didn't know what to really expect. I've had a pacer in one of my other ultras, and I was in such a bad position at that point that it felt like it didn't matter. Like it was just like it's complete wash because I'm totally like done, right? But I was excited to have someone, but they're like, you hope the conversation goes well and just that it's helpful, and so expectation was a little bit of a question mark, but I knew it would help. I knew that like I wouldn't have asked him to come down if I didn't think a pacer was going to help. I also at this point didn't know what to expect from running through a full night because I had never done a full night. And so I didn't know if his job was just going to be to keep me awake or what to expect. I mean, I knew that typically like I'm someone who can usually like stay up late or get up early, like kind of better than people that have been around me, I guess you can say. And so I thought I might do okay through the night, but I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if I'd just hit this wall that I've never hit before and it would just totally like knock me out. So I was glad I had him for that. Yeah. But yeah, like now we're well into the night. We're 65 miles in, had a big low, but at this point I'm feeling pretty good. And so I actually, had started to eat a little bit. Like I think I remember at that aid station, I grabbed quite a bit of like real food. Like
what kind of food?
I think I had bacon and quesadillas again, were the two. But I also had like had a little bit of a GI issue where I had to use the bathroom there. And I was like, well, that was kind of interesting, but whatever. And so then we run to this next one. So we start running through this next section and kind of walking out, eating and whatnot. And then we get to running and we move through it really quickly. Again, for the most part, just passing a few people here and there, but everyone's so spread out at this point. But it was like, hey, feeling good. Conversations flowing really well, really enjoying it. I'd learned some things about him that I didn't even know. I didn't realize that like he's a soccer coach for a college here in Utah called BYU. And he'd won 5 out of the 6 national championships they had won. And he was so like this guy, like he was he's really interesting. He obviously had a wealth of knowledge and was a leader on, leading this team. And I mean, I think he told my parents that they get like 2,500 applicants for their soccer team a year. Good. Like that's how, so he's built up this prestigious program after being there for like almost 20 years. And so it was really interesting. And then he's a really good dad. And so I'm just picking his brain about all these things related to dad and some coaching. And so it was like the miles are ticking by then, I'd imagine. Exactly. Yeah. So the miles are going really well. So we run that 6 mile section, get into the next aid station, and I think we just were going well enough that we actually like kind of beat Joe, our camera guy there. He wasn't expecting us that soon, but I immediately went straight back to a porta potty. I had clearly done something that had messed up my gut a little bit, and I think it was when I was at my low. I think I started to eat too much fruit. Or there was some bad water there because my gut was. And we'll get to this, but my gut wasn't okay for a few days, basically a full week. I was kind of struggling.
Wow. Like almost like a parasite or something.
Something. And I think I read one time a review that also said something like that. So that's why it came back to my mind that someone had gotten sick from maybe water there. But something was kind of going on. And so that ended up playing a part as far as me like not wanting to eat a lot of real food kind of the rest of the race. I just kind of went back to just a ton of just the liquid calories.
Good thing you had that liquid calorie plan to fall back on, because that's like you said, it can either be bonus calories or that can just be your calories if need be. So
yeah, I had enough calories packed into those that it could be like it could just pretty much be my only calorie source, and so that was really nice. But yeah, so we get out on the next section again, and this next section is that area from Coyote Hollow to Red Hollow, where there's all these rollers and things. So it was an 8 mile section, and it's not super runnable. So it took a little bit more time, but it went well. Again, I have no idea what place I'm in, and it didn't matter, but just kind of making some passes. And I remember passing a few people where it was like, they had this like little dinky headlamp. They're just crawling down the trail, and you're just like, man, I'm so glad I don't look and feel like that right now, right?
You guys are coming through like a freight train with huge lights and like a semi truck coming down the trail.
Yeah, and I think it had an effect because like eye fatigue like was non-existent because you're not squinting to see, and so it really played a big part, I think, in that. Like there's no like depth perception issues because you're wearing a light on your waist. I also had a headlamp, and so you're getting multiple angles lighting on rocks. And then the conversation's flowing, and it just went crazy smooth and well. And so we got into Red Hollow 3 at this point is what it's called, at mile 80, around, I want to say 6 a.m. So we're pretty much through the night at this point, and it was like no tiredness, no eye fatigue, no like I just need to take a dirt nap or something, like you hear all sorts of things. Just went super smooth. And so then we have this loop to do again. And then Brandon was going to leave, and I had to finish the last 15 miles on my own. So yeah, we go off onto this next loop, and coming through that loop the second time, much harder. Cause it's just these punchy, real punchy climbs. You climb up and then you drop, and then you climb up and then you drop, just over and over. And, I had definitely slowed down, but I was able to run the downhills, which I was still I'm like 80, 85 miles in. I'm still able to run these sections. Like that's way better than I've done in any of these other ultras that I've done. Yes, it's like I'm feeling some pain at this point, and it is what it is, but it went really well. And then when we get to the bottom of that section, there's like it's like 2 full miles, I want to say. It feels like that on this paved bike trail. Oh. And I got to that, and I was like, I'm not running this. Like it was like the easiest miles to run of the whole thing, but the pavement just was hurting. Like it was just hurting my lower legs. And I'm a baby. I never run on the road. Like I only will run on trail. So it's probably half mental, half physical there.
Well, there could be something mental as well with like, you feel like you should be running fast because it's a paved road, but that far into a race, I mean, give me flowy, rolling single track any day over pavement.
Yeah. But got into there, and that was where I was saying goodbye to Brandon, and I was feeling great, right? It's like, I only have 15 miles left. Like this is almost in the bag, and it was just, it felt really good. And part of the strategy too, like why we had pushed, as hard as we could at night, was I was able to stay hydrated really well, things like that. But I did not want to be trapped in that section again in the heat of the day.
Right.
So I was like, the farther I can run at night, the less I have to do in the heat of the day, because that about killed me yesterday, right? Like,
so this is where then doing 2 laps of a loop helped you, because now you're strategizing around the terrain. You've experienced it. So
yeah, that's for sure. I knew these climbs that were yet to come, even if they had been difficult the day before. At least I knew what was there.
Sure.
And this is probably also where I learned, maybe the value of the pacer, because so I leave Brandon there and I set out on 15 miles to do totally alone until I get to the finish. That's where I was going to.
Sorry, what time is it? What time is it roughly then?
8 a.m.
8 a.m.
Yep. So still cool, still pleasant, still nice, but it's starting to get sun really pounding down pretty soon. So I leave, and yet again I come out of there, and there's that long climb out of that aid station, and I was like, by the time I got to the top of that long climb, I'm like, I feel totally different now. Like I felt really good. Now suddenly my eyes like aren't focusing. I'm extremely tired. And I'm like, wait, I thought if I got to the sunrise, I'd be like smooth sailing and it would be good. And so that's where I was like, man, maybe having Brandon there and some of the conversation and stuff was helping me more than I thought. Maybe, I don't know. I still am not 100% sure what like started happening there. But all I know is that 6 mile section, I don't know if I've ever been more tired. Like, and then I started to get into like this head loop where I would like look at my watch, and then I'd like run, and then I'd look at my watch, and I'm like, I didn't go anywhere, like I'm not moving. And so then I like sat on, I thought there's a water drop in there, and I was running, and I'm like, I must have passed that water drop. Like I just didn't see it. And I'm like, okay, cause I think I only have like a mile left to the aid station, and running. And then I see the water drop, and I'm like, no, that means I still have like 2 more miles to this aid station. And so I sat down on a rock right there, and I put my head on my hands, and I like did the whole like fall asleep and then like wake up as you're falling off the rock. And I like did that, and I look up, and someone just had run into the water station. I'm like, okay, maybe I can just keep up with them. So I try, they dust me. I like can't keep, I'm like just not moving again. And I'm like, okay, when I get to this next aid station, I'm going to lay down and try to sleep for 10 minutes. I'm like, I think I have to. But I'm also in this limbo mode of like, I'm now off track to hit my 30-mile goal. Really, that had kind of started to fall out of the picture when I had that like heat exhaustion happening the night before. But I'm way ahead of hitting a 36-hour cutoff. And so I'm like, I'm in this limbo mode. I'm like, I can walk this in, and I've done it.
Sleep for 2 hours, like whatever you want to do. Yeah.
So I start to get in this head loop of that. So I limp into this aid station, power hiking, whatever you want to call it. And I get in there, and again, Joe is allowed to be there because he's media. And I'm like, Joe, I'm laying down. Like I'm taking a nap. I swear it's the only aid station there that didn't have a cot. So I lay in the dirt. They have like the side panels up on these easy ups, and they're blowing in and like smacking me and stuff. But my strategy was, hey, I didn't take any caffeine in that section because I'm like, oh, it's morning. I don't need caffeine with me. So I didn't have any. So I got there, and I drank like a full thing of Coke, basically, had some potatoes, which I hadn't eaten to that point. And the potatoes like went down way easy. And I was like, that's interesting. And then it was, okay, now lay down and sleep so that you give that caffeine a second. And then hopefully when you wake up, you've got the caffeine rolling and you're better. So I laid down, and like the crew, there's like the whole crew there, and there's some kids that were with the crews and like the volunteers, and they were being real loud. And so I'd like almost fall asleep, and I'd like wake up, and I'd like almost fall asleep and wake up. And I'd like almost fell asleep. And then it was like that moment of like, I think I am asleep. And then I like snored, and I woke myself up. Yep. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm getting up. So I get up, and I'd set an alarm for 10 minutes, and it had been like maybe 8 minutes. And so I get up though, grab my stuff, and I'm like, okay, Joe, like I'll see you at the finish line. Like I'm out of here. And started off down the trail, and totally different person, like totally wide awake again, totally focused. Everything had changed again. And so I'm like, okay, do I want to walk this in, or do I want to like run it in with my head high? So I look at my watch, I do some quick math, and I'm like, I set a new time goal to be there before 32 and a half hours. So I'm like, that seems doable. I know I've got these nasty climbs in here, and hopefully I can run the last 3 mile downhill there. And if I can do that, then I can hit this time goal. So I set a new time goal, and I just start moving as quick as I can again. I had these 2 nasty climbs again, and I definitely slowed down. Like even though like my focus and my eyes weren't like struggling to focus on things, and my head was awake and stuff again, I was still 95 miles into a race. And so the climbs weren't quite as quick, but stayed moving, again, feeling good because I'm passing people again instead of like getting passed. And just was feeling good. Got down to the last aid station. By this point, my foot had started to really hurt. I don't even know when my foot started to hurt. Probably sometime in the last 10 miles. And it felt like a bone bruise on the outside of my left foot. And so I was like trying to take it easy. And I did have to do like this mental push, because when I got into that last aid station, it's about 3 miles of downhill road running, dirt road running. And it's really hot. And I'm like, that's just going to be like a ton of pounding on my feet. And so I didn't know if I was gonna be able to run it. So I attempted to run it right out of the aid station, and it felt good enough to go. And I was like, okay, like I'm probably doing more damage, but there's got to be damage done in a 100-miler.
Oh yeah.
So I was able to just jog in for the most part those last like 3 miles. And when I say jog, I mean like slightly faster than walk. And but I was like moving, and that to me was a huge win. Got in there with like 32 hours, 25 minutes. So it came in a little like with a few minutes to spare on that like last time goal that I'd kind of reset, and just, I guess finished with my head feeling high. And it was wild. I don't know. Like it was interesting. I think the most interesting thing for me was I was like expecting to have like I had some personal, I've had a lot of personal things going on in my life, right? Like I went through a divorce last year. And in some ways, like I was hoping that like this would like culminate in me just like having a life-changing experience or something. And at some point on this like run, I was just gonna like, I don't know, like process things and work through things and all this stuff. But like it never, like I was so focused on just the next steps ahead of me the whole time, just the next section, that like it was just so weird to just like finish and be like, wait, I have like nothing to do now. Like it's over. Like I don't have a next section. And like, I just thought I was going to be like, you're 32 hours out there just thinking your own head and your own thoughts. But like, I don't know. I was just like so focused the whole time that wasn't really how it felt. It was like, it wasn't like I was just out there like thinking about the butterflies the whole time. It was just so laser focused. But, so it's interesting to process that, I guess, over the next couple of days as well. But yeah, I mean, just finishing was just such an interesting dynamic. I mean, like you've dedicated your life to this for 3 months, and then to have it finish, and it was really rewarding. It was really rewarding, and it was, I don't know, just a really cool, I guess, sense of accomplishment, and to just be able to look back, because I think it's all perspective. Like at some point you start believing you're going to be able to do this, right? But if you zoom out even a year ago, this was a completely impossible task for me. And so I think that's like where it's so cool to be able to just stop and think like, that was a completely impossible task for me. It's a completely impossible task for 99% of people if you were to go ask them. But, with enough time, I think you can do just about anything.
I mean, you train for these things in the same way you race them, which is just one step at a time. And so like you say, this is a process. And I'm like you, I typically don't have these aha moments in a race. I don't have even crossing the finish line. It's not like it all hits you at once. Sometimes you're like, oh, I'm done, I guess. But you're still thinking calories, nutrition, timing. And, you have to it takes a while to come down to detach from the process that you've been so engaged in. And it can take days. And you can look and go, wait, I just did that thing, And so, first of all, we should say as well, you finished what, 30 something, right?
32 hours.
32nd out of 150. And what was the finishing rate this year?
There was still a 40 or 45% non-finish rate.
Okay, so out of the 115 or so, maybe
there's
what,
like
55?
60 that finished, I want to say.
60 that finished, okay. Yeah, so you were mid-pack in the finishers, but way, way further ahead as far as the starting line goes. One thing I didn't get a chance to ask you, I mean, how much time did you spend alone in this race? Because it sounds like you were meeting people along the way, you shared some miles, you had a pacer for a good chunk, but how much time, did you spend a lot of time running with other runners, or were you trying to sort of be on your own as well?
I was just so focused on running my own race and trying to not go too fast, too slow, like that I ran definitely a majority on my own. I mean, I only ran a couple small segments with anyone else. Yeah.
What were some of the lessons that you learned? First of all, let's start with what did you do right? What part of your plan, your strategy did you execute well on that you're definitely going to do again?
There's a lot of little things. And that's why, like, in general, I feel like it was like that went as smooth as I think it possibly could have for a first 100. So I think starting off the race, trying to keep my heart rate lower, worked out really well for me. I think the amount of liquid calories that I did worked out really well for me. I think I might have been a little bit high. Like, I probably could have not quite been that high. And then, like, specifically on the calorie level of it, I was butting up against like the roof of how many calories you should put in fluid. You know what I mean?
Well, and just to add to that, it's also about how much carbohydrate you can digest in an hour or so. Yeah. So there is a limit to how much your gut can handle. And whether that contributed to your stomach issues, maybe in a delayed fashion, it's hard to say.
Yeah. So I think that like I was probably butting up against that, but overall that worked fairly well. I'd probably just dial that back, 10, 15% on the future one. But overall, like, I could force that kind of calorie down at any time, where sometimes you look at food and you're like, no way, right? But I could just force the calories down in liquid form. And so that worked really well. Obviously, having at least 1,000 milligrams of sodium for me worked well. I've had tons of cramping in the past, and I think that was, looking back, it was like at one time I went way too low, one time I went way too high, et cetera. And so,
and sort of jump in again, just to add to that, to clarify, your strategy is roughly 1,000 milligrams per liter, not per hour. It's relative to the water consumption. So if you're drinking less, you're taking in less sodium as well.
Yeah. To my understanding, it's like your salt concentration doesn't change hardly at all. And so it's just per liter. It's just a concentration. So I think I could honestly go up a little bit more than that, but hey, this worked right now. And if I was doing like a faster race, I might need to dial that in a little bit better. But I think in a longer duration race like this, it worked out just fine. Things that worked well. I don't know.
Well, it sounds like the waist belt. That wasn't part of your plan, but it came in. So is that something you're going to use in the 100%. Future?
100%. Anytime I'm going, if I'm hiking or running for like multiple hours during the night, not just like, hey, I need to get to camp tonight, like on a backpacking trip for an hour or something. That was huge. Absolutely huge. And so it's like, is it more weight? Yes. Cause it's like a battery bank and the little waist light.
Right.
So you're carrying an extra like half pound, maybe, 10 ounces or something with the battery bank and the waist light. And you can go, about that. Well worth it. Absolutely worth it for me. So anytime I'm running through the night again, I will be using, that one was a Kogala one. I really like that because it like had more of a spread, but there's a couple others. So waist light worked really well. Pacer, definitely.
Do you wish you had a pacer for that last 15 miles in hindsight? Would that have?
It would have absolutely helped. Yeah. I think at that point I was a little bit too far off my goal to hit the 30-hour mark, but it would have, 30 minutes, maybe 60 minutes, probably would have got shaved off that time. I think in the future, I probably had sections I could have pushed a little bit harder in, but I'm only confident to do that now because of the experience of finishing it. You know what I mean? So it's like, hey, I think I had a little bit more some of these sections I could have pushed in. I might do a shoe swap the next time. Have another pair of fresh shoes. I think that might have helped with like that foot issue, because that foot actually swole up over the next couple of days, and it wasn't a bone bruise at all. Like I run with leg sleeves on my calves to help get like the blood out of my legs. I kind of have like bigger calves, and so then the fluid seems to get trapped in them, and so I do really well with these leg sleeves. Well, then after I finished, I pulled on a pair of socks that also are like compression socks, and I basically left those on for like a full day. And then when I finally took those off, my foot swelling went down almost immediately and the pain went away. And I was like, I was clearly causing issues with some of this too. So I don't know what to take from that, but I probably would do like a shoe swap for me, again, 200-pound guy, just fresh foam. Probably would just be nicer on my feet, say 60 miles in.
It does compress.
Yeah. Other things that went right.
Well, what about what went wrong then? I mean, that kind of verged into it. You would have changed your shoes. What else would you have done differently?
I think that I ate too much fruit in one section, and And so I think like while fruit has worked well for me in training, I think in a 100-miler, fruit can be dangerous because, you know, you eat fruit for a 1 or 2 hour effort is different than if you're eating fruit for a 20-hour effort as far as fiber and then, you know, potentially, you know, passing that through. So I think that was something that I learned. Potatoes, like the potatoes to me, I think may be like a ticket in the future. Might be too early to tell, but like I was still wanting to eat, like, it's easier to eat carbs than like meat and protein, even though like I want to eat those. I didn't get a lot of that down. I thought that I needed it, but in reality, like in hindsight, like it didn't seem like I needed it in 100 miles. I think it would have helped me if I could have digested or could have put some of that down. They didn't have any like hamburgers or anything at the aid station. So it was like quesadillas, and I think the cheese is like good, but there's like all the butter on it and stuff. And so like, but potato seemed like it was smoother going down. And so I don't know. That was like one thing eating wise. Other things that didn't go right.
Starches are one thing. I think for me, often it's solid food is because I just get hungry. So even if I'm drinking calories, my stomach's like, yeah, great, but we want food, you know? And so sometimes it's just getting something solid in your stomach, and potatoes can do that for sure. Starches, easier to digest than protein. For me, it's also when you get to those multi-day events, that's where it gets a little more complicated. Fat and protein become more important. Yeah. But yeah, one night, it's like just whatever you can get in. I don't think you want to overthink it. It's like just calories.
You'll laugh, but I did pack like some food that I had like in a cooler with my crew. And I always thought that like when on your races, you had like sushi. And I was like, oh, that's not like, I'm never going to not want to eat sushi. Yeah, I had 0 bites of sushi.
Oh, really? Okay.
But I had like a sushi burrito. And I think the idea was like, there was way too much going on in that burrito for me to look at. You know what I mean? Like there's like shrimp and crab and tuna and spicy mayo. And it's like, maybe if I had just like a very basic little roll, that would have gone down. It's
more about the rice. And you'll see American MMRs often have like rice balls with soy sauce. That's all you really need. You know, it's just a complex carb.
So the other funny thing that I threw in there that I just thought like, I don't know, like it's just fats and sugars and stuff, and maybe I'll want to eat it if I don't want to eat anything else. So I threw some cookie dough in my cooler, and I ate 0 of that as well. Yeah. It did not sound appealing either. So I've been eating that ever since, but you know.
What I would say you did right though, then, by the sounds of it, is you gave yourself options, because you don't know what you're going to crave on the day. And the point is, you don't want to just only bring cookie dough or only bring sushi. You had options. You didn't use them all. You didn't exercise the options, but I think that was a great plan. And maybe you don't bring the same options next time, but having options, having extra stuff you can say no to, I'd say that's a win.
What I did eat though, is I pre-made some rice and chicken, and I did have like 1 strip of chicken and some rice. Yep. And that worked out pretty well.
What did your parents think of this whole experience crewing you? I'd be scared to have my parents, especially my mom, crewing me. She'd probably try to get me to stop when she saw the state of me. What was your parents' experience?
Well, they've actually been at every ultra again, because they're local here as well. Yeah. But I thought it would be hard on them. I was nervous for them because they're in their 60s, and it's like, man, they might be up all night, and my mom gets really nervous, you know, and so. Like even when I like at mile 45 or 44, when I told Joe, like, I'm not doing that well, like I'm going to be after my expectations. I didn't think about it till I left. And I'm like, he probably told that to my mom, and now she's probably freaking out. And sure enough, that's exactly what had happened, which is just kind of funny, but typical. But I think their thing is like I grew up in a household that was like, my dad was a chiropractor. And so he was always like, he's only seeing injuries, right? So he'd have runners come into his office and be like, you should never run because all you're doing is wearing out your knees. You're just wearing them out, right? Like this idea that like your body is like a non-regenerative tissue. Like, so it's like if you use it, it gets taken away and it's gone. And so like he's kind of warmed up and adapted to like see some of these efforts that I've done, and like he still thinks I'm completely crazy, but at the same time he's like, that's pretty cool. That's really interesting. And like I've given him some examples of like whatever, Bronco Billy, you know, Jeff Browning. I'm like, this guy's 52. He's crushing. He's been doing it for 20 years or whatever. Like, obviously you don't just run your knees into non-existence. I'm like, in reality, like running has taught me where my weaknesses are and then how to fix them. And I'm a way better, well-rounded like mechanism, right? Like I don't have muscle imbalances as much as I used to, and my joints feel way better. And so, yeah, so he's kind of come around to that, but I do think that they think it's just crazy in a lot of ways, but at the same time, like they're so supportive that they're there to, you know, to watch and just help. But and thankfully in the middle of the night, once I got my pacer, I think between having Joe still like there doing some video stuff and then having the pacer, they did skip an aid station and sleep a little bit, which I was happy about. So, but yeah, I mean, I think overall, I'm like, you guys probably have a pretty interesting seat, because honestly, sitting in a crew aid station and people watching has got to be very entertaining.
Yeah.
So, anyways, yeah, they did good, and I think their whole thing is like, hey, that was awesome. If you ever do one of these again, we'll support you, but we highly recommend you don't, at least for a while.
Well, on that note, what's next?
Yeah. So for me, when I finished my first ultra, I had this like strong feeling of like revenge. Like I have to go back and do that better than I did. Like this compulsion. Finishing this ultra, it was like, I didn't have nearly that sense again. It was more like, hey, could I have run this faster? Probably, but this was my first attempt, and I accomplished the goal. And so I felt much more satisfied with the overall effort and just being like, hey, like a little more like, I guess, just like internally proud or happy with the accomplishment. And so far I haven't had this like strong compulsion to just go sign up for the next 100. And so to me, I'm kind of like, I find that signing up for ultras is a really good way for me to set a goal. And then if it pushes me out the door, right, to go and train and stuff. But I think I'm going to try to focus a little bit more on fast packing for a bit. Maybe I'll like play around with like an FKT that's like totally like never heard of or something like that. And just kind of like set some obscure goals for myself. But I think eventually I'm going to have to sign up for another ultra to like just keep the fitness where I want it. But would I ever do another 100? Yes. Is it the next thing I'm signing up for? I don't know. I got a little bit burnt out of training, but the bug's not going to go away of like ultras. You know what I mean? So, but I think that's like, I guess to also bring it back just to that idea of process, right? Like, I think that's like, as a few days went on and I thought back to like the whole thing, it was like, you know, the benefit of like, did I get out of this whole experience what I wanted to get out of it, right? Because like, I think, you know, you can build it up like, oh, I'm going to be like 30 hours running alone. I'm going to have all this head time. I'm going to learn like something. I'm going to like, I don't know, process something in your life or like have a little bit of a light bulb moment about something. And really what the light bulb moment for me was, it was the whole process, right? For me, getting outside through the whole training process, right? Cold days, windy days, days when it's after dark, days when it's before the sun's up, you know, but forcing myself outside all of the times that I had to go train and moving the body, you know, each and every time I did that, I'm getting, you know, usually sunlight. I'm getting that movement in the body, and that movement in the body, you know, opens up so much in the brain for creativity and processing and thought. And so, you know, week after week, you know, going through this process of getting up, training and then obviously culminating in this 100-mile effort of like, hey, you just did something like really hard, you know, like it kind of, I guess, brought together the whole picture of like, no, like this wasn't a destination, it was a process. And enjoying that process is the ticket, right? Like, and it is like, did I get what I wanted out of it? Absolutely. Like I had so much more like mental, emotional, you know, clarity and happiness during that time, focus, that was brought to me because like I wasn't just, you know, say filling any extra time I had with who knows what. It was like it was more structured, and it was very much like a time to be present. Like when you're running, you can't look at your phone and be like, oh, what's on Facebook right now, right? It's like no, you're running or you're going to trip and fall. And so it forces like a meditative presence. And so I think through the entire thing, that was exactly what I needed. I just needed to consistently kind of get out of my own head, get out of my own way per se, and you know, have that time. And so all in all, it was an amazing process. It was an amazing thing to be able to check off of a bucket list for me. And it was just a part of, you know, the whole picture. And I guess even within that, like that's part of a bigger picture in of itself too. So
what I'm hearing from you is this, which is similar to my experience, is that there is no aha moments at mile 30, mile 70, or even when you cross the finish line. It's about that entire process of running that race, but also so that started back in October of training for the race. And you could argue started a couple of years ago when you first started running. It's been a journey, and you've changed throughout that, and will continue to do so. Your journey, you know, you're on this journey now. You're on this path, and there's no moment. It's about, like you say, it's about that entire process. So this is just kind of one milestone along the way, potentially for what else is to come. And do you have any North Star races, or is there anything that's on your bucket list that you'd love to do 5-10 years from now? Anything that you're...
Yeah, that's a great question.
Or routes, FK, you know, whatever, fast packs, like what's on your list? Yeah.
Yeah. I think it would be really interesting, you know, to either run UTMB or fast pack the Tour de Mont Blanc. Yeah. So either one of those I'd be really happy with. You know, but then there's some big ones like, well, maybe I need to go see if Leadville really was harder or easier than this race or something. Right. But I think there's still some races out there that I think were like unattainable. So in my personality, sometimes like those may just sit in the back of my mind for a long time. And depending on how life unfolds, like to me, like after running the Tusher race, I look at Hard Rock and I think that's an impossible race, which, you know, like, it's not like UTMB is really much easier than Hard Rock, I would imagine. I don't know, but like Hard Rock to me is like insanity. And so, you know, maybe if I continue on this running journey for a long time, like I'll get that bug to just look at something that crazy. But I do want to spend some time like maybe doing some of my own stuff, like fast packing, and then continue with maybe some shorter ultras for a little bit, and then see what really calls out to me. But there's a lot, like it's a growing sport, and there's more races happening and there's more coverage happening. And so it's fun to be a spectator of the sport right now. And I'm sure something's going to catch me and just be like, that's the one to go do, you know? So,
well, it sounds like
I'm not crazy enough. I'm not crazy enough to do 240. The Moab 240 is still not on my list, Jeff. No. So.
Well, never say never. I mean, you checked one off your bucket list, you added two. And 2 years ago, running 100 miles, I'm sure would have seemed crazy, and you just did it. So I don't know that running a slightly harder 100 miler is that much different or that much of a stretch. And frankly, running 240 miles, give it a couple of years. It's never say never. So this film you guys are making, tell me about this project. When can we watch it? How long is it going to be? Do you have a sense of what this film's going to look like? Yeah.
So, we've actually filmed pretty much everything we need. So it's really just a matter of time between the other stuff going on here at Outdoor Vitals, you know, how long it'll take to edit. So I am hoping that, you know, it can be within 2 months. I don't want it to drag out like forever. And so hopefully within 2 months it'll be on there. But there's going to be obviously a lot of just probably overlap in what we covered, but it'll be much more firsthand and probably a little bit more personal as well. I think we wrapped a little bit more personal story into it and some of the process there. But I think it should be a really good one. Anytime Joe's excited about what we filmed, that usually means it's going to turn out okay, and he's pretty excited. So
I can't wait to see it. This has been a really great chat, Tayson. Like I said, I wanted to hear all about the race, so hopefully others got something from this as well. Seems like a great series of events, and it's such a beautiful area. I was down visiting you guys recently there in March in the area. And while I haven't spent time specifically in Bryce Canyon, I saw it from not too far away, and I can only imagine it was quite an experience. So again, look forward to seeing the film when it's out.
I did try really hard during the race to take in some of the views and just enjoy the process as well. And it's a beautiful area for sure. So have it on your list one day.
Yeah, for sure. Anything I didn't ask you, anything you want to add about this event or about your experience?
I would just say this, like, last thought here is just that, I think anything is possible for anyone. I think it's just a matter of a timeline. So, and what I mean by that is I've seen this over and over again in my life. A lot of times we see things around us that's like, oh, that's impossible for us. But I think if you've got a big enough drive, and then you just give yourself enough time, I really do think that anything is possible. Maybe it's the amount of money you want to make. Maybe it's a 100-miler. Maybe it's, a backpacking trip or whatever it is. I think the problem is we get so caught up in the time, the time perspective of it, that it seems impossible. And so I think just ask yourself if there is a goal or something that you want to accomplish, and just say, okay, like I'm really interested in that, but it seems impossible. It's like, well, is that impossible in a year? Yeah, that's impossible in a year. Is it impossible in 5 years? Or 10 years? Like, I think that really changes people's perspective. And that was 100% what this 100-miler was for me. Is 3 years ago, 100% impossible. Like even last year when we were hiking the Colorado Trail, we did a 100-mile section, and I thought about having to have done like 5 days of backpacking in one effort. I was like, it's impossible. No way. Right. But, sticking with it and just time and whatnot, I think you can really do way more than you ever think is possible. And it's just one step, right? It's just the next step.
That's right.
It's always just the next step.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You got to trust the process. That time's going to pass. That 5 years is going to pass either way. So yeah, exactly. You can either build a house, brick by brick in that time, or you can let it pass and not have completed whatever bucket list or goal item you have. So. Awesome. Well, congrats again. Look forward to following your journey as it continues.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jeff.
Yep.